When it comes to making a scrap quilt, there's a fine line between scrappy and crappy. In this episode of the Midnight Quilter, I'm going to show you a scraptastic quilt pattern that not only uses scraps and pre-cut strips, it also looks amazing. Plus, I'll share tips on how to machine quilt scrappy quilts. So, let's get started. There's enough crappy out in the world right now, so I'm going to stay inside and make my beautiful quilt. To get started, I'm going to need the background fabric, some lovely accent fabric, and scraps. This quilt uses mostly 2.5-inch strips, so it's a great use of your scrap fabric. Except I may have spent too much time playing with my scrap fabric and not enough time sorting it, so I'm going to take the easy route and use a jelly roll. I'm going to be using these pre-cut strips by Jennifer Sampu from her Sky collection. Okay, I know it's not technically scraps, but it sure is pretty. I love pre-cut strips, but they can be very linty, so I'm going to use a lint roller real quick to clean it up, and then we'll see the beautiful ombre goodness of these strips. This is just going to help clean up the edges a bit and make it where I'm not dealing with so much lint. It's like fabric confetti. If only there was a big lint roller for life to clean up all the crappy messes. What I love about this fabric collection is that it's ombre, so it goes from dark to light with this beautiful texture. So unlike a typical ombre, it's not going dark to light to dark, it just has that one gradual color variation that's going to look great in my scrap quilt. Plus, it's like a solid, but not technically. It does have a beautiful texture, and these colors are just going to shine on my quilt. They kind of remind me of a colorful bowl of chocolate. So pretty. Okay, enough fabric fondling, let's get this cut. Normally when working on a scrap quilt, I would just cut these strips up without worrying about what color they were. But since these strips go from light to dark, I'm going to be more intentional about the pieces I cut. Yes, I am that person that likes to control where the fabric goes in a scrap quilt. I can't help it. So I'm going to open up my strips. And to make it go just a little quicker, I'm going to stack a few of them on top of each other, making sure that the dark ends are lining up. And I'm going to cut strips out of the dark side and then strips out of the lighter side. And I love that even though I'm using the same strip, I'm still going to get that scrappy effect because the color change. The next strips I'm going to cut just a little different. I'm going to lay out the next set of strips the same way, all of them opened up with the dark sides lined up together and cutting them in different lengths. By the way, you can get the pattern or the kit if you want to make a scraptastic quilt too. Just check out the link in the description box below. Well, now that I have my beautiful strips cut out, it's time to cut out the background and the accent fabric so I can make my first block. I'm going to cut this into some strips and squares. And this accent fabric will be repeated throughout the quilt to give it a look of repetition. One thing that keeps me from having a crappy day is listening to musicals, and of course right now I'm on Hamilton. So anytime I think of being young, scrappy, and hungry, or I'm not going to throw away my scrap, I mean, I know he makes it sound better than I do, but you know, it's fun. I'm just going to cut up my background fabric into squares and triangles, and I'll be ready to make my blocks. To make the first block, I need 4 longer strips of different fabrics, accent squares, the background squares, and 4 groups of fabric. Using the fabric groupings is going to give this quilt a little bit more cohesion. Still scrappy, just less crappy. So to make the first block, I'm going to lay them out like this. 1 of the longer strips, the 2 pieces of fabric that match, my accent fabric, and my background fabric. This block will actually need 4 of these arrangements, and to make the piecing go a little bit quicker, I'm going to do some chain piecing. So I'm going to lay all my pieces out in a pile and start sewing them together. Once I'm done with the first section, I'm going to cut these apart using a thread cutter, making it go nice and quick. So I have my 4 blocks all ready to assemble. And this is where we can start to see that fabric grouping is so important. It's going to make this strip look like it's coming underneath the next one and give it more of a uniform look. Now I'm going to assemble the 4 of these into the block, but I'm going to square them up first before I do it. I know it's going to take just a little bit longer, but the result is going to be so worth it when the block goes together like that. And the blocks that aren't quite 6.5 inches, well, we'll just go ahead and throw those in the pile. Once these blocks are trimmed to somewhat close to the size they're supposed to be, I'm going to assemble them so that the accent fabric comes together in the center. Once I have the pieces laid out with the fabric meeting in the center, I'm going to sew the blocks into rows and then sew the rows together. A quick press and this block is finished. I'm actually going to need several more of these for the quilt, but I'm going to show you how to make the second block first. The second block is going to make an X, and I'm going to use 4 longer strips and the triangles of my background fabric. Again, here is where my scrap OCD comes into play. These could all be different colors, but because I want each part of the X to be similar, I'm kind of grouping them in the same fabric. You don't have to do that. You can make it totally random if you'd like. But no matter what fabrics you use, it still goes together the same way. I'm going to take my longer strip and find the center. Quick little finger press. Basically, I want to line up the midpoints so that the triangle is centered. Then I'm going to right sides together and sew it. Now, I know it looks kind of funny right now, but it'll make sense here in just a moment. Then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Also, finding that midpoint means that these triangles will be directly across from each other, and when I go to trim my block, it'll be much easier. So this block is pressed and ready to be trimmed, but I need to make sure that this strip stays in the center. If it doesn't, it might be more of a wonky X, which would still be fine, but you know, we're going for scrappy, not crappy. So I'm still going to use my 6.5 inch ruler, even though these are going to be 5.5 inches. The most important thing to remember is as I'm trimming it up, I really want to keep this diagonal line along the center. If your ruler doesn't have this diagonal line, no worries. You can take your block and fold it in half, and it will give you a nice crease to follow. So lining it up on the fold or along that diagonal line, I'm going to extend it just past the 5.5 inch square mark so I can trim 2 sides and then rotate it and trim the rest. And there's my first adorable block. I'm just gonna do that with the rest of the blocks and then we'll put them together. Now that I have my blocks, I'm gonna arrange them so that they all aim towards the center, and then I'm gonna alternate the colors so that I have the one continuous line of fabric. To add the center, I'm gonna use my accent fabric. So we have a cute little plus sign in the middle of our X, and then 2 different groupings of our other strips. I'm going to sew these pieces together, then sew the block into rows, and then sew the rows together for my second block. And there I have my second block finished. I love how it makes a little cross in the center, how the fabric comes together to make that X, and even though I'm using scraps, that background fabric still keeps it nice and cohesive. So now that I have my first and second blocks done, I'm going to make several more of those and then show you how to lay it out to make the quilt. I'll be right back. This quilt goes together so easily because there's no sashing, no borders, just these glorious blocks. So for the first row, I'm gonna lay out my first block with the second block in between. Now these blocks are completely interchangeable, so I can move them around. If I think, that's not working, that does not work for me, I can easily switch it out, rotate it, do whatever I need until I think the color placement looks perfect. Once I've decided it looks great, then I can sew that first row together. But here's the best news, no matching seams. Oh yeah, oh yeah. All right, I'm gonna get this sewn together and I'll show you what it looks like. My first row is finished. I even have the second row done, and now you can start to see the secondary pattern come out, where those X's are just kind of lining up. I'm so excited about the blocks. I've even finished the bottom part, so I'm gonna get this assembled so you can see the finished top. My quilt top is assembled and I'm almost ready for the quilting, but I wanna show you what this would look like if it was totally scraptastic. Obviously, with this quilt top, I've had a little bit of control of where the fabrics go, but if you want a total scrap vomit quilt, you can achieve that by not having any control of the placement at all. Let me show you what it looks like. So these are actually blocks from a class I taught over at my shop. I have a quilt shop in Liberty, Missouri. So if you're ever in the area, you should stop in and see us. But it was from a mystery scrap buster class. So it was actually this pattern, and I think you can see all the beautiful different scrappy fabric placement. So it'll still look lovely, but if you like the bold, beautiful colors of this jelly roll, just so happens I have a limited supply, so you can order the kit on my website. But I'm gonna stick with this placement. I'm gonna get this quilt sandwich basted and get to quilting. I'll see you in just a sec. Machine quilting scrappy quilts can be so much fun because with all those different prints, you'll have plenty of room and opportunity to try different designs. I've got my quilt sandwich basted and ready to go, and I've selected 2 thread colors that'll be perfect for the coordinating thread collection. A soft linen that will blend in nicely into that subtle background, and then a brilliant blue that's gonna look great in all the other prints. I'm also gonna do a little bit of ruler quilting to create some different effects. Quilting 2-inch finished strips is my favorite because there's so many design possibilities. So let's try a few of them out. In this portion of my X block, I'm gonna do a little bit of curved piecing with Shelly. Now what I love about the Shelly ruler is that it creates the same curve on both sides. So that means I don't have to work from all different sides of the foot of my machine. I can stick with one side. What I want it to do is I'm gonna position it on a strip and I want it to land on the halfway point. I'll quilt 2 curves and then work from the other side to create another set of curves that mirror image and overlap. It sounds more intricate and more difficult than it actually is. Once I have one strip done, I can easily go right into the next and continue on. In the background sections, I'm going to quickly quilt those with a continuous curve design, which is as simple as quilting a line that curves from point to point to point. Mind freehanding these larger curves, but if that scares you, you could definitely use a curved ruler for that area. Now in these longer strips, I'm going to put the ruler away and do a little bit of wishbone and ribbon candy, something that's nice and quick and easy to quilt. about having a quilt made with so many different fabrics is that as you're using different designs, if you don't like the way they look, you can easily switch to something else. Now, the little plus signs of my block, I'm going to create a little dot-to-dot quilting to give it a little geometric look that will look great next to the curviness. Now, I could use a straight edge for this part, but Shelly has enough of a straight edge on it that I can just continue using this one. For this design, I'm just quilting lines that connect points of the block. It's so quick and easy and intricate looking. Well, it's obvious that I'm going to have a lot of fun quilting this quilt, so I'm going to get to pulling out all my favorite designs, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished. This quilt is finished, and I can definitely say it is not crappy. I love how you can make a scrap quilt as organized or as random as you want. By using just a little control of the fabric placement, I've created a gorgeous scrap quilt that almost sparkles. Since the blocks go together so quickly and easily, and with no matching seams, this quilt can brighten anyone's day. Plus, the strips were just the right size for machine quilting with some of my favorite rulers. I've had a blast turning a crappy day into a scrap-tastic quilt. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back next week with a new episode of the Midnight Quilter. And don't forget, if you like the quilt, you can get the pattern or the kit at themidnightquilter.com, or just click the link in the description box below.